on our panel here, we have Jerry Green, retired attorney. We have, do we have Chris? We still have Chris. So Chris has done a lot of corporate work, corporate consultant work, leadership kind of work as well, which Paul, you might be interested in.
Yeah.
And Andrew. And then Christian has been working a lot on emotional levels, stress management, relationships. And Jack, also, you've been working a lot with young people, haven't you? So we've got a really interesting group of people who are experienced in applied Aikido in the various fields that you talked about. So maybe we'll start with Jerry. So Jerry, can you so what we'll do is we'll do like a little interview kind of thing with each of our panel, just to hear from them, and then you can pop some questions if you want, if you want to ask them questions. It looks like we have quite an intimate kind of group here, which is good. So you get to ask all the questions and get them answered instead of having 150 people, So, so I'll ask people. So Jerry, can you tell us a little bit about, how your work and how it got started, and the sort of the practical aspects of taking it, taking your Aikido into the applied Aikido space practice?
Sure. Well, when I came into Aikido in the early 70s in Mill Valley, I was a practicing lawyer, so I was involved in disputes and dispute resolution. I also grew up with a mild congenital cerebral palsy, so I had physical limitations that would normally have kept me off the mat, except George Leonard said, "Come and learn the warm-up exercises. You might find something of value." And I was intrigued by the bilateral, my cerebral palsy mostly affected my left side. And I was intrigued by the bilateral sense of balance that was in the training. And I was also playing a one-handed game of tennis till once I got hit in the eye at the net, and I realized it's not a very healthy game for me. So I did come into Aikido thinking I'd just hang out in the warm-up segments, and I stayed. And it was quite interesting to me because I was training in a way like I was two different people on my right side and my left side. Left side was still very contracted. I'd done a lot of somatic body work. I didn't know that much about center, and I was intrigued that Aikido taught me to be in the center, from which actually my training partners didn't see a great difference on the right and the left in the way that I grabbed or responded, although it was quite apparent to me. I would say I was in Aikido for several years before my attention shifted from trying to learn techniques to being more interested in the principles. And the principles refined themselves for me to ground, center, and extension. And I began to see how those principles enhanced my ability to do techniques and practices. I'd be interested in learning new techniques and paying attention to instruction, but it was more about how do I respond to the pressure of somebody attacking me, regardless of the technique. And I found I progressed more with my technique by paying attention to my ground and my center and my extension, not contracting under pressure. And then I wrote an article about that, which is on the website for the Applied Aikido Association. And I have since, probably starting about 20 years ago, taught those elements of Aikido in public seminars for stress management and conflict resolution, And in the last 10 years in men's work in the Mankind Project, where the pressures, you know about the Mankind Project?
Yeah, I did
Good.
the new warrior. I did the new warrior adventure training.
Nice. Okay, well, then you know that men carry around shadows that are unconscious, that drag us down or attack us in ways that we are now anticipating. And I realized, we get riled up when we get triggered. And settling down into center and finding ground and responding with extension rather than contraction made a big difference. So I found that these Aikido principles initially just informed my facilitation in men's work. And then I began to teach people how to speak the language of head, heart, and hara. What's on my mind, what's in my heart, the feelings, what's in my hara, what's not known. What do I have to wonder about? What do I have to intuit? What do I imagine? And it's brought men's work into a deeper sense of embodiment. For many years, the Mankind Project was quite proud about teaching men to be in their hearts and feel their emotions, which we were not raised or encouraged to do as children. But not about about the unknown. That's a little embarrassing to have to deal with, like, the still point in us, to find it for one, and to trust in it, even if it doesn't answer my questions. It just really basically makes me feel more secure in my body, where I'm sitting, where I'm standing. And from that place, I have a different kind of wisdom. It's not the kind of intellectual knowing in my head, and it's not the kind of emotional, feeling-based knowing. It's in my heart. So slowly, the Mankind Project is waking up to hara, and it's applied Aikido. And then I was a pioneer as a lawyer in identifying the scope of practice for holistic health practitioners and distinguishing that from the practice of medicine. I defended them initially for a number of years before realizing that they could contractually define a non-medical scope of practice. And so I had a keen interest in really doing the same kind of thing with the evolution of applied Aikido as a professional identity. And then COVID hit and we lost the dojos, right? So now all we got is applied Aikido, or people waiting for the dojos to open. So this is really a cutting edge kind of way of thinking about Sensei's teachings. He really said that Aikido wasn't about techniques. But somehow we learned a lot of techniques and it looked like a martial art. But it applies to relationships and communication, and it applies to teamwork. And that's what fascinates me now. So I'll stop there and pass it on to somebody else, and we'll see what kind of curiosity we piqued.
Thank you, Jerry. Chris, would you like to tell us how you come into this space? Because you've had a lot of experience with the corporations and leadership, executive and leaders anyway. So what was the tipping point, or where do you feel that your previous work phased into the applied Aikido work?
Hi, folks. I don't know if I've met each of you before, actually, but I welcome your interest in this work, and I'm happy to support anybody who wants to talk about it. My own path has been very circuitous, full of luck, and some savvy, some street savvy. In the 70s, I was the consultant to Marin County, California, to develop employee assistance referral programs. If you know what they are, they're confidential referral for personal issues. I had no background for that and no university training, so I knew pretty much from the beginning that I was in over my head because I was running a neutral INR or referral hub, and that meant every once in a while something really intense came through. So as I developed it, more and more intense issues arose with the crises in people's lives. So one day I saw a guy doing Aikido, and I thought, that's how I need to be to do this work. Otherwise, I'm going to burn to a crisp. I'm in over my head. So I began to train Aikido with him, actually, out in his backyard. I would bake him a loaf of bread, and he would throw me around his backyard, and I would carve him some calligraphy, and he'd throw me around his backyard. So then I found Richard Moon in a chicken shack in West Marin, and began to train with him. And I still hold him as my teacher 45 years later. What occurred, however, was that someone I helped in the employee assistance work was a national sales manager, was a medevac pilot in Nam with PTSD. Essentially, his life was falling apart. I got him into counseling, but I also said, you need direct access to the rush of combat. You are addicted to this rush. He was using big ticket sales, gambling, drugs, he's given me permission to say this, and other rather intense activities to try to get back to the rush of aliveness, of full tilt, open system awareness that he had experienced in combat. He had flown 1,000 sorties. Most of these guys flying medevacs were dead at 300 because the Kong just loved to knock them down. Anyway, Jim got his act together. He came on the mat with Moon and I and trained for a couple of years, squared away his life, squared away his marriage, got a new job, left the area. Then I'm burning out on my futon, having sacrificed my marriage to save the world after a dozen years of this intense insanity, helping folks. And Jim called me up and said, hey, I just got a job in San Francisco. I'm coming back. I want you to help me create a company. Well, I would say maybe 2 months before that, I had been in tears on my futon in my office, wondering what was next, and made a declaration that I would find a way to work with leaders upstream of the problems that the employee assistance game was required to deal with, and that I would find a way to create with a leader or leaders organizations that didn't eat people. So boom, Jim calls out of nowhere, haven't spoken to him in 2 years, off we go. It's Cellular One San Francisco. We spend the next 15 years building out the wireless industry. And he simply put me on his senior team and kept me there for the whole 15 years. And my role was to prevent casualties. So that morphed into develop the leader, develop the leaders on the senior team, develop the leadership team, develop the teams out in the field. I won't go into the mechanics of it, but it essentially was the carte blanche to create culture. He said, I want to create a high-performing, caring culture. And so we made a declaration, and I use Aikido to embody intuitive declarations with executives. We used the embodiment work from the very beginning. Not only did he and I train with Moon, but we brought Moon on as well. So the three of us were Aikidoists, and we taught Aikido in slow motion, non-falling to everybody in the company. When we went out to develop the teams, we used the Aikido as a physical form of dialogue. We worked with Bohm and dialogue, and we used dialogue as a verbal form of Aikido. And so we were able to develop deeply embodied, deeply presenced dialogue in all of these teams that were doing breakneck projects all over the country, building out these systems in record time. So I was totally gifted by Aikido and this guy, Jim Dixon. I'm glad to answer any questions. Beyond that, I reached out and began to work with other companies and in leadership development in particular, and using the Aikido as a way to embody presence and open to harmonious relational awareness in the team environments, and then to tap intuitive wisdom as what guided us. So we would use Aikido and dialogue to create strategy. We would work on a strategic question for the senior team and retreat for 2 hours, and then go outside and do Aikido or Tai Chi or something, and come back in and go, so what did we learn out there that could make a difference in the strategy? So I've become really focused in my work now with a half a dozen key leaders and some nonprofits that I play with on what I call field awareness, and the ability of the inner work of Aikido to help people drop into a deep presence and sense the field of dynamics, whether they're team relational dynamics, the organization itself, field sensing, that is energetic field sensing of the environment, the organization's position in the market, its movement in the industry. The emphasis here really is not just tactical stress management, so to speak, but the ability that Aikido brings to dissolve the limits of the persona, as Jerry was implying, and techniques, and release into intuitive awareness. We would, as a senior team running multi-billion-dollar organization, drop into silence, posit strategic questions, and allow what arose in each of us to guide a kind of composite, unified commitment to action. And we would declare for breakthroughs. And as a result, we led the industry for all 15 years. I'll stop there. I've had some wonderful other clients. Most of them have been visionary risk takers who've been willing to bring this in and just go for it.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, if you don't, if your questions are starting to form, that's good. If you'd like to ask them now, that's fine, or we can sort of have a question roundtable later.
Let's hear from the other two folks, and then
and
question away.
Christian, tell us. So Christian is one of the, I suppose, the Applied Aikido Association is pretty much his brainchild, and so we are here. I mean, we've contributed, the five of us and a few other people, but Christian, I think, started the seed. So, there's quite a lot of motivation behind all that. So tell us, Christian, what that motivation and what your experience has been.
You hear me well? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Well. Okay. So what I like in Applied Aikido in general is that we can attack the field in different way. And when I'm listening to Chris and I say, okay, how different it is, and at the same time, how similar it is in the experience we have. And that makes the magic of the field. And for me, I would just want to say that for me, falling into the soup of Applied Aikido was a kind of accident, because I'm an engineer and I'm passionate with modeling and neuro-linguistic programming. At the same time, I was doing Aikido since 1972. And for me, it was different fields. And suddenly I discovered that, okay, these are common points, and maybe it is convergence. I define myself as a pragmatic guy. Like I like to say to my Californian friends, I'm living too near Germany to be a kind of dreamer. That's the way I defend and I propose my image. But I know it's a little bit exaggerated. But nevertheless, I think it's quite the advocating of my practice is based on the fact, okay, if you feel it, maybe you will be interested. So I don't try to sell anything. I don't try to induce any kind of belief around the practice. Okay, just feel. And if you are interested, we open the door and we explore a little bit further. And my first challenge was, because I was passionate with modeling, it was, okay, is it possible to model? That means find the essential elements in the experience we can have in practicing Aikido that has an impact on our daily life, as well for professional use, as well as private life use. And of course, there are so many, but for me, it was just, okay, identifying and sparing the people to practice 30 years of Aikido on a mat and still benefit of the advantage and the qualities of the philosophy. Because it's not just a bunch of ideas, it's an experience, it's an embodied experience. That's the challenge. Otherwise, it's just a philosophy like others. And what I thought was interesting is just identifying in the movement the essential gesture that create the experience that we can feel in our body when we practice Aikido for years. So it's a kind of finding the shorter way, finding kind of shortcuts. And then when I find something interesting and I call this approach Aiki-Com for Aikido communication, I felt initially that I was kind of alien, alone in the Aikido world, feeling this kind of experience. And I was so surprised and so satisfied to find that there were all the crazy guys in the world doing the same kind of thinking and practice. And that was for me a very good news. You don't feel alone as a crazy guy. Yes. It's quite comforting in a certain way. And but now it evolved with the time so this happens in 2008-9, and then it becomes an urge to share it. And I said, okay, we may not keep this for ourselves. And after 10 years as a professional proposing Aikido, applied Aikido practice in companies, in enterprises here in Belgium, in France, and also a little bit in UK, I was kind of tired of having to explain always the same principle and say that that's not just an original stuff. It's just a basic practice because Aikido has intrinsic qualities that could be shared. And moreover, and we see this with the crisis we are now experiencing these last years, that my opinion is that more than ever, the world needs these Aiki values, Aiki philosophy, and Aiki wisdom, and it will be more and more important in the future. So it came from an accident into an urge to share. And they say at a certain moment, we cannot hide it for ourselves. And then came the question, okay, and why are so many different people doing this? It is not known from the general global public. And at the same time, they all have a particular, a specific practice that is different and at the same time that is similar. And I think, okay, maybe it's a weakness, but it's a richness because this diversity is quite challenging when we try to find what do we share in common. But at the same time, it's a richness because it is offering different possibilities for different needs and problems the people try to solve by this way. And for me, that's really the challenge. And I'm very strong believer that collective intelligence is solution for the future, and that we can never go further than just doing together, sharing together the knowledge, the experience we have to create something more that we cannot make or create alone. Even if we are brilliant, if we are genius in the field, I think that the meeting of the different point of view experience is a kind of richness that will make possible that what I like to call applied Aikido as a field of knowledge could develop. And as an IT guy, I'm very, very sensible to what we call the open source logic and philosophy of development. And I'm really a strong believer in the fact that we can just share our knowledge and that we can rest on each other's experience to create new models, new practices, new variation on the same basic philosophy, wisdom principles. And each time it will be more original, more efficient, because it will take in account the globality of all the experience we are gathering in our own practice. And I think that's cannot be beaten by any kind of individual knowledge and practice. That's what is pushing me in this direction of just investing energy. Is because I really profoundly convinced that it is necessary, that the world needs it badly, and that we have now is the time to, I would say, I like playing with words, it's promoting, it's just promoting as professionals, this field of practice more than just individual practices. And I have so many things to tell, but I will stop here. I think it's a good way of explaining what's the garbage in my mind.
Thank you for sharing your garbage, Christian. It's always good garbage anyway. Okay, well, Jack, yeah, what would you like to tell us about your experience and how you got into it, and yeah, what you're up to?
So I'm glad that I followed Christian, because probably what connected me with, I met Christian a number of years ago and have visited him in Belgium. I'm on the East Coast of America, near Philadelphia and all. I'm the East Coast American. Jerry's the West Coast American, Chris and Jerry. So we cover the two coasts, right? But anyway, my background's in education. And so you notice in the background, Youth and Peace in Action. I'm going to tell you about that because that's a present group I'm involved in with the Rotary, an international organization. I'll tell you about that. It kind of fits in to my journey too. So I'm also an educator. So I have my classroom blackboard. And so I want you to look at these 6 words, and I'll use them. Essential, and Christian talked about that. Self-cultivation, and then principles, energy, and form, okay? So principles, energy, and form, I just located this about a month ago in a translation of an ancient Tai Chi master. And he said, all classical Eastern practices have these 3 essentials. And I went, wow. So essentialism is what I've been after. And as an educator, when I ran into Christian and neurolinguistic, meta models. And at some level, we get to meta models that are fundamentally the same. The language is culturally dictated. And the last thing that I ran across recently I have an undergraduate degree in philosophy, is most of the Eastern tradition focuses on self-cultivation. And we're seeing that in leadership. That was one of my first ventures. It's not, that's an essential piece. We can only change ourselves. So that's what I'm going to come out. But anyway, I started like many of you here on Aikido. I was 45, I'm 76 now. And taking those ukemi was pretty hard at 45, and learning how to fall and get up, But anyway, as I was going through this, and then I was an educator, a teacher, I said, there's something going on here. This this kinesthetic, this somatic thing that's pretty much left out of Western education. You know, we focus on the words and memorization, but something's missing. So my journey, and I had some friends that I met over time that had trained in Japan and all. I didn't know the language, but I was learning a little bit. But there was something different about not talking and just moving, right? So I said, as we've talked, how to move. It doesn't have to take 30 years till we get this enlightenment. You know, you get enlightenment studies, you know, your mom hits you in the face and you're enlightened, you know, you get it. So, but there was something missing to me in education with leaving out these essential somatic pieces. And so what drove me as I continue my Aikido, even today, I had an Aikido class today before we met. I'm continuing my practice. And if you noticed, the form is what's essential, the form of how we manifest those principles. But how do we move and do that? The three principles. So what I got interested in leadership. And so what I did originally was I'd go to workshops and seminars, and I'd start off by doing an Aikido demonstration as a metaphor. And people would go, what's that? You know, and then I would use it to extend the metaphor to whatever we were talking about. You talked about, Paul, you know, leadership, followership, whatever. But I was trying to show them the form of what they need to practice, a do, you know, a do. And they didn't get that. Do? What are you talking about? You know? So what's evolved to me, I said, well, how can I impact on that? So probably about the end of the 90s, I ran into people as I was looking in leadership, Ron Heifetz's work at Harvard, you know, and other people that are very process oriented. And so I started to say, well, how do they teach it? So I didn't go to Harvard, but I have a very good friend that was one of his colleagues from Northern Ireland. And we got together and we connected. And he said, wow, how come, he was at the University of Maryland, would you come and do Aikido in a couple of my classes while I teach the cognate stuff at other weeks? You know, so we started to partner. And what started to happen with me was I said, how can I get with people that have a curriculum, a syllabus that's very didactic, and build in a somatic, comparable, parallel thing to help people not only begin to understand the concepts somatically, but also I found it was Irimi, Tenkan, the things that were essential to this practice of Aikido. You know, it was different. It was something different. So I started to align this physical practice off the mat and finding people that had curriculum that wanted to try this. So that was my educational movement. And I've done this internationally. And that's when I ran across Christiane. So I became very interested in this meta move to Christiane's aiki. He has a 5-component meta model that to me is really transformative. You know, and each people that have come out of it have put these principles and these forms in their own way. I particularly like this one, you know. So the most recent, and I'll get to that. And so I've hung around Christiane a lot, and I'm a Rotarian. So I've developed kind of a one-day camp for kids on peace, because that's one of the big Rotarian principles. So I've aligned with organizations that have these principles, and they speak about it, but they don't practice it, a do. And so I created, a curriculum that kind of extended what people were talking about. So that's been kind of my direction in my educational piece. And so this last piece you see up here, this is a major $500,000 venture by Rotary International in America on the whole East Coast. And I'm the contact for Pennsylvania. And the people in here are very interested because they come out of a kind of if you're familiar with Outward Bound, they're bringing a little bit of experiential education, but fundamentally it's still, the first half is based on some theoretical models on peace. And the second half is kind of back to Tuckman's group development and getting young kids to try to apply this piece and then go into the community and do an intervention. But they're not talking about these essential principles that are the foundation, to me, of what we learn in Aikido, which is compassionate and which is functionally, and Christian talk about, really addressing conflict. Because so many people dance around conflict, but Aikido's right in it, you know? So I'm always finding people, how do we bring that to your work, you know? So I'm working with these people, and at this point, I'm learning their process with the hope that I can build in some somatic conflict, compassion principles that are practices and forms that are missing from this didactic training. So you can see where I've gone. We've got to practice, we take it off the mat, but we have to align it with people's language and also with their principles, but in a way that's form-based. It's a form-based that they actually practice it. So that's where I'm at in my life.
Great. Thanks, Jack. So yeah, so we've heard from all four of you, and it's interesting the similarities and the differences, but especially the similarities, and all coming from different origins. There was this. Quite often I'm asked, do I know enough to do this stuff, and do I have to be a downgrade and all that sort of thing. What do you guys think about, when did you feel that you were confident to share this, and that you felt that you knew enough, and that you felt that you were, you weren't going to get tomatoes thrown at you, or, there must have been some ease into that. Tell us about it. Yeah, Jack.
Well, I'd start being an educator. I mean, the first time I went to an Aikido class, I was as dumbfounded as other people. You get on the mat, and my teacher was an American, although I visited his teacher, Japanese, in the States. It was a different experience, Gakahoma. But, my first impression was I was like, and I'm 76, remember Kung Fu, when you had to wait outside the temple? And you're thinking, why aren't they letting me in? What is this? And my first American teacher was that way. He even tried to speak kind of broken English Japanese. And I'm thinking, what is this stuff? So I was confused. But, as I read more and got more familiar, I would then share that with my educator friends. Like I said, I would get one of my colleagues to do an Aikido demonstration as a metaphorical thing in our workshops. So I didn't have to be Dan ranked and all. I had to have a comfort level, and I had to have a partner. You can't do Aikido by yourself. And what I found was most people have never seen that or experienced that. So what I found is after I did this quick 5-minute demonstration, instead of going into an intellectual discussion, and my friend was very good at this, we turned to the audience and said, what did you see? And it was amazing that they were seeing the process. Oh, I saw cooperation, I saw leadership, I saw courage, and we just used that as a basis for, as Chris said, dialogue. And what got me interested was I was doing something that most people never saw. So the fact that they saw it, at first they were saying, you can learn to do this? I said, yeah, people can learn to do this, And so I was comfortable enough, to bring that off the mat and share with people and engage people in dialogue. So I don't think you have to be a Dan rank or an 8th Dan to do this, but obviously in our grouping, as you go on, you understand a little more. And as you dialogue with friends, you come to a common language, So that was my experience.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Chris.
I would say the day after somebody taught me to center, I started coaching people in centering.
Right.
Again, I was at this referral hub. So when people came through, they described their situation, I'd hook them up with resources, but take that moment to teach core principles of presence and getting off the line and send them on their way. It evolved. I began to actually teach stress management and the like inside the companies that I was doing employee assistance for. So it evolved from that, but you don't even need to have taken Aikido to share Aikido.
Christian?
I think it's an important question because it can be a serious limitation for people not to take the risk to make the step and to go in the direction of professional practice. And for this, I like to remind my definition, probably shared by many others, of what is a sensei. And I like this. I remember in my dojo, the first time the people switched from calling me Christian to sensei. And for me, it was a shock because, okay, I didn't feel I was a sensei because I had so strange high-level imagery. But then I discovered the definition as the sensei is the person who is walking just a few steps ahead of you. So you don't have to reach the destination to be a sensei. You just need some step before, practice before the people you are teaching. And I think that was really comforting in this sense. And I think it's quite the similar logic that we can have to apply to see, am I ready to do some kind of applied Aikido practice? And I would add just, okay, if we look at the known criteria of Aikido, you have first number of years you are practicing. But is it a good criteria? You can practice for years without having any kind of feeling of what you really need to apply out of the mat or into the world. So I think the number of years is not necessarily, depends what you are doing during these years. And the second criteria is the grade. And the grade is just an evaluation according to a certain objective. It's a kind of mastery of the practice, mastery of the technique. And it's also not a criteria that we really need because you are not doing beautiful randori in a company. You are just sharing the values. So the criteria that we generally find in Aikido, I don't think are just applicable. And I would say that I was this morning doing a workshop around what we call in NLP meta program. Is just the way you are evaluating if what you do is right or wrong. And so you have internal reference or external reference. External reference, somebody say to you, okay, you get this grade. This means that you are able to do this. So the truth comes from outside. And you have the internal reference. Is okay, I feel I'm ready for doing this kind of thing. And I think the criteria, when you just face some kind of leaders or teams or whatever in companies or in school, whatever, I think the main criteria is comfort. Do I feel comfortable when I'm sharing these values, this principle, when I see how difficult or easy it is to apply for these people, the question they will ask. If I feel uncomfortable, maybe I'm not ready because I don't have all the general landscape and vision of what I have to share, what I want to share. If I feel comfortable, then I'm ready. It's just as simple as that. So it's just a question of course, there is a risk. But I think that Aikido is just offering us to challenge ourselves in risky situation. That's what we are doing when we are doing a randori on the mat. So we take this challenge of vulnerability and facing this kind of challenge. And then, of course, then the criteria of comfort is important. And I would also add integrity. I have to feel that I'm just worthwhile when I'm proposing this and just faking some kind of knowledge, strange knowledge, or etc. And I would add finally a last point that it's not only from where you come, and we speak here about Aikido, of course, it's where you are proposing this. So the destination domain is really important. If you don't know anything about the domain you are meeting the people, probably you will be surprised and put in uncomfortable situation because you don't understand the environment, the culture where you are just proposing this. And then maybe you will hope that the people will make the translation, will make the translation into their language, into their culture. Of course, it's possible, but it's a risk. And then the final decision is it comfortable for you if you do this or not? But most of the time, I think that if we take the 2 step ahead that you can have with people not knowing anything about Aikido, most of the time, technically you're ready. And now you just have to complement by ready, but in my comfort zone for teaching it, even if sometimes I'm challenged, because we all know a situation we feel ready, and then we are just disturbed by a question or by an objection, by a critic, or by the reaction. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Could we hear a little from the 2 folks that joined us?
Yeah. What do you make of it
It's
so
gotta be
far?
percolating questions, right?
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
happy to go first
Yeah,
as I'm
sure.
not a
Paul.
downgrade yet.
Yes.
So my background, a little more about my background. So I'm a recovering management consultant. I did 20 years frontline management consultancy for PricewaterhouseCoopers, Capgemini, and IBM. I found my happy place teaching soft skills, but I was really unhappy. So just to quote a fact, in 2019, globally, we spent $350 billion on leadership development. And look where we are. So there's a huge disconnect in terms of that. And I really believe that the somatic, the embodied piece of that is what's missing. I firmly believe the principles that sit behind Aikido as I know them today also sit behind that. There's the work of the Arbinger Institute out of Utah, and that's brilliant as far as it goes, but it doesn't go to the embodied piece. So for me, I'm desperately excited to be in this group because I'm itching to go. Okay, I've got a retreat next May, and I'm dying to put some Aikido daily practice to set the tone for the day, but also to set the tone for the conversation. Because I'm taking people to the Northwest Highlands of Scotland, which is very wild, very isolated, to a beautiful place that's going to inspire teams to resolve conflict. And I want to use the principles to do that. So I'm very comfortable sitting in front of groups. I teach at universities here in the UK. I teach leadership and management topics. So standing in front of people isn't the issue. I'm learning to be an instructor, so they've started me at second Q, and I do the warm-ups, and I give the introductory lessons to the white belts for the basic principles of Kamai and the basic principles of Ukemi and Kiyonwaza and that type. So we give them 3 lessons, and then they're ready to join the main class and learn from there. So I have that. To Christian's point, is how do I then cross the bridge from the mat into that world, and just make the connection's about there, and I'm just waiting to go that distance to make it. So I'm really, really excited about that. In terms of the men's work, and certainly with young boys, I have a background in psychotherapy. I too am an NLP trainer. I went through that whole thing. So partway through my consulting journey, I sort of sat on the end of a hotel room after a consulting day that was pretty hard. I looked at the hotel wall and I said, is this it? Is this the rest of my life? Something's not right. And that took me into NLP. It took me into energy psychology. I'd done judo as a kid. I did Tai Chi a little bit in my 30s. So I've always been drawn to the martial arts. But when I found Aikido, I was like, oh man, I'm home. So I think there's a little bit of me that says I'm not a downgrade. How will that be perceived? I know if I work locally, I can get my sensei to come and give a demonstration, so that counts as that. So I'll pause there, but those are sort of my excited ramblings based on what I'm hearing today. So thanks for inviting me to speak.
Thank you, Paul. Well, we hope to hear from you, even more. Andrew, would you like to pop in and say something?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what's been going on. I also come from an education background. I'm basically a school teacher, but retired now. But I have always used or tried to use my basic underlying Aikido principles in terms of dealing with students and also with, parents and sort of resolving disputes, etc., etc., that may have happened in school. I'm from a school background rather than a college background. And I've always found it a great help to actually have this underlying basis to fall back on and actually dealing with sort of resolution of conflict and sorting out disputes amongst, teenagers and their parents. I've also done some Tai Chi, and I find the whole underlying Eastern philosophy behind all this is much more useful than some of the modern Western stuff, to be honest.
Gerald, can I add something?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So listening, thank you, Andrew and Paul. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It brought back to me something that, again, reinforces in me the Aikido piece, the Aikido, the Do, or, the Tao, as Andrew said, the underlying piece. And like I said, I stumbled across this self-cultivation. It's not about telling other people what to do in leadership roles. It's being a model and then working on yourself, and helping others become. But in our space, we call our space the Center for Movement Arts, and we have 4 arts practice there: Tai Chi, yoga, off and on, a Kyokushin, a hard form of karate, and then Aikido. And there's times when the Tai Chi people, on a free night or open mat, are on the other end practicing, and then we're doing Aikido class. And what continues to strike, I reflect on in terms of, remember those 3 principles, the form. How are you discovering yourself? What form are you walking in? Like you said, Andrew, I worked in schools at all levels every day. How do we show up? How do we move? What form do we have? And if I was watching a video last night with little Irish kids that use the F word. Sounds like a sailor, American sailor, but that's a form of language, right? That they've acculturated. So what's the form, and is it beneficial and practical at a meta level? So in our practice, what comes back to me is the way people have been introduced to these spiritual Eastern practices in the Western culture. Yoga's taught very individually, and it's about breathing and posture. It's not moving much, holding forms. Tai Chi, even most of it, they don't do pushing hands and all. It's, again, for health and benefit. Of course, the pugilistic part of karate, I'm not talking about people that get to higher levels of their own understanding, but at first people want to knock your head off, and they want to, it's very, it takes a while to get to a point of understanding blending and all, even in karate. We have some good teachers that are constantly saying that. But from the very beginning, what I've got some Tai Chi people doing Aikido, and they can do the form solo or the kata, but the minute you put somebody else in front of them in this partner practice, it reverts to our instinctual piece, and they forget even what they've learned in their forms, And what strikes me, because I train under Satomi Sensei, and he's always saying, who are you, to be or not to be? Who are you when you confront conflict in the real world? And to me, Aikido's always putting you into that so you can begin to cultivate your real self, your true self, through these forms. And that's when I see this every day, I say, I'm thankful that I stumbled into Aikido, because it's at a level where you're really trying to deal with what's real. And even though you hear people, the debate, well, it's not really. And some of our senior instructors in Aikido say, of course not. It's choreographed. It's working. We're doing that. But, the only way to be real is to bring all these new people in and say, okay, fight to the death. And who's ever finished, we'll give you your dojo. But you have nobody left. We're killing each other. So there's got to be some level of understanding. But at least it's approaching conflict and getting you to see that. And I think that's what Aikido is, It's really at that point of confronting conflict in your own self and in this relationship. And what have you learned? And what's your form? And how do you go forward? So to me, that I heard that in what you all are saying too. And to me, that's what I've found in my own work off the mat, is to say, you're missing this piece when you're looking at leadership. You're missing this piece as you get into groups. Because Paul, in Tuckman's work, it's forming, storming. There's going to be conflict, right? How do you work through that?
But that's what you want. You want conflict because you get to a better solution. So how do you do that in a way that's safe?
Yeah, these other things are saying, let's give language, let's give you some metaphors. Now go out and figure it out. And most people never get past the trauma of learning forms to get them through. So I think Aikido, again, has those principles in it.
Yeah.
Could we hear what you gentlemen would like from us? Are your needs being met?
It's making the step that takes what you do in the dojo out into a different context, and it's how you actually make that change that is from my point of view anyway, is the kind of the issue really.
That is to say, how do you hang your shingle out?
Yes.
Yes. But I mean, I can't just go along to some big company and say, I want to come in and do training for you. You have to have a way into that. You can't just hang up.
Sure.
And this is what I want to do. So how do you make that transition?
So the tactical, or I don't know, strategic tactical question is, how do you develop champions who will bring you in? And we can speak to some of that. That's what Paul already has, in the sense that you're already in a role of influence. It's a question of how to play it, given that you have the forum. But to develop the forum, that's a few steps back. And like anything else, my own experience is that it depends on your willingness to tell some stories about how the principles or practices of Aikido have brought value in work situations or in situations that you yourself have been involved in. It's not that you have to already be an accomplished consultant, but it is important that you're in a position to say, well, here's how I've seen it resolve conflict. Here's how I've seen it develop communications more effectively in my own life and in the organizations I've been in. So that's a first reaction. I'm going to say something tactical about marketing as well. One of the most powerful ways I found, and non-linear ways I found, to engage with the businesses, if that's where you're going to go with it, and I'm not sure that's what your intent is, Andrew, but it was to make a list of 25 people that I knew and to share with them a one-page overview of a story of how I would like to see it play out. That is to say, a kind of parable about how somebody faced an issue, got into the use of these practices and resolved their issue. So telling parables. And so I made a list of 25 people that I knew and went out to all 25 one-on-one and said, I'm interested in starting this work. This is a story of how I've seen it be effective. Would you give me feedback on my story? And they did. And then I would say, is there anybody you think I should talk to who might be interested? And they would either give me names or they wouldn't. And then I would go to those people and I would continue the process of using a request to help me with an overview or a story about the work, to guide me to meet people, to use it to get me out to meet people. And it turns out that the little old lady across the street who I worked with early has a brother who's running a chemical plant. You know what I mean? It's nonlinear. So I offer that as a way to think of nonlinear marketing of this, of just getting out and letting people know I'm really interested in doing this work, and I want some guidance on how I can do so.
So do you think, Chris and the others, do you think you need to prepare a curriculum, like have something that you are, like a set piece that you need to present, especially for someone who's beginning, that can.
If you get to the point where you're working with a group, you need some structure, yes, but working with individuals just in conversation over coffee, I've said, well, if you really like to experience, why don't we just step outside for a minute? We go outside and I'd center them and ground them and lift them and bend their arm or not and go see. It's like Jack said, or Christian.
Yeah.
The first thing after getting with someone and describing your interest is to give them a direct experience of what we're talking about, and then it takes care of itself because they become curious.
Yes. Yeah. Do any of the others have a particular structure or something? Yes,
yeah,
Jerry?
I'd like to jump in here, because since Paul asked the question, and actually Andrew asked the question about how do you try these aiki stuff, and Paul started us by saying he's that close to something. He's not too sure what he needs to bridge that gap. I struggled with that for a while, and meeting with clients who I was handling their conflicts with, as a lawyer. And I would think, well, at some point, this Aikido stuff fits in here. How do I bring it? What do I do with it? And I think I was patient enough with that question that that their curiosity changed my focus beforehand. So I essentially embodied that sense of grounding and centering and being comfortable under pressure until I didn't need to offer anything, until somebody's curiosity said, well, I'd like to be able to breathe as easily as I hear you breathing under the pressure of this strategy about how we're handling this dispute. And for example, in men's group, when somebody has a charge that they need a clearing for, I would realize that charges get people riled up. Okay, so there's an opportunity to settle down. Well, that's like grounding and centering. Just the idea of settling down before you try to figure out a process or a practice to teach something. So settling down might just mean putting your attention in your navel and see how your emotional charge feels from there. Get underneath the emotion and underneath the judgments. And that's the somatic piece. It came quite naturally. And I found it way more effective than my doing something that I'd prepared to do, which then I would need justification, I'd need authority, I'd need confidence. but when someone's curious and they're asking, how can I counter this feeling of being riled up when I feel a charge about something? An opportunity to settle down. Well, how do you change your focus of attention from the judgments in your head or the passions in your heart to that still place that's underneath it all? You could put your thumb in front of your navel. You could just feel your feet on the ground. And the time and the manner in which that happens, actually, it could happen by my modeling it. Because I could be standing next to a guy who's riled up and I'd just say, okay, put your attention on me and I'll settle down. And they'll get it. So there's really two strategies here. You can have the authority to have a platform that you'll teach, or you can wait until you can't avoid modeling it because it's part of you, especially if you're in a situation where you're under pressure. And as a management consultant, you're under pressure. People are looking at you for what to do. And if you move around in front of them in such a way that you model ground and center and not contracting in on yourself, you can stay open and expanded and connected with people, they're going to get that message and they're going to communicate that to you in their own language. That's what's really interesting, because then it's a lot easier to respond to their curiosity than it is to come up with a script. And I learned that when I was trying to come up with a script. I was trying to come up, I should be the sensei here. I should have something to teach, And I was saved by the bell, basically, because they saw it. So I would say stay in your comfort zone, stay in your expertise, trust that your training has made you more centered and grounded and perhaps more able to stay connected with people under pressure. That's the extension part. Extending your own energy from your heart instead of from your head or the passions in your heart, from your still place, and be comfortable about wondering what you don't know. But you'll convey that you're in your center, you're in your hara, you're comfortable in your body, and they'll get it. And then you can explain it to them in their own terms, because their curiosity will tell you what to say.
Thanks, Jerry. Christian,
I think
go ahead, Christian.
Yeah, I think it is coming together with a question we talked about with Paul a few days ago about, should I have to say that I'm doing applied Aikido, yes or no? And I think Jerry brought a kind of answer in this sense. It's just the people hire you for the qualities, the skill you are embodying, more than what you are trying to sell as ideas. But at the same time, I think it's a kind of dual objective. Of course, as an individual, if you embody the qualities, the people will want you for what you are just offering as a person, as a trainer, as a consultant, whatever. And at the same time, if I take the look of the global field that is applied Aikido, in my wildest dream, I'm just hoping that it should be known enough so that the people say, okay, I would be interested by this. For the moment, it's not the case. The people don't know what it is, so they will never ask for it. So if you are just saying, I'm doing it, it will be strange language because they just don't understand what you are proposing. And for there, and like I always say, okay, you can put on paper as many lines as you want, and sometimes in 15 seconds, you can demonstrate what the people are just trying to get in their training, in their consultancy, etc. So I think it's just it. So we come on to the client with our personal skills. That's what we are proposing. And then we don't necessarily have to explain it. Maybe after, if they ask, oh, where does it comes? Or during the practice, you say, and this is inspired by, or this kind of explanation. But at the same time, if I put myself at the global level, I'm really convinced that we, as well as we need to share this common knowledge about the practices, the exercises, the techniques, the models, etc., that we can create from applied Aikido. This is a need that the people who are beginning in the field, beginning to propose their service by applying Aikido, telling it or not telling it's not a problem. I think that we would have some kind of advantage to share a kind of study or work group exploration about the marketing of the product as such. Probably there are sentences, probably there are ideas that are working better than others, and we could spare some time to the people just trying to formulate their offer by say, okay, if you want to speak about your practice with applied Aikido, this is working well, this is working less good, and this is totally not working because the people are afraid, because this Japanese stuff, I'm not interested, that's not for us. So I think that the same way that we can just think about what is the field of knowledge as a model, as tools and exercises, we really need to set up together this kind of, what kind of marketing can we propose around the practice we are doing. And of course, in the beginning, it's useless to just say it because the people don't know. So there is no added value to say, I'm doing this and you don't know what it is. So who could be interested by this? But then in a longer term, I would be so happy to see that the people know this is a skill I would like to find. And I would like to find a trainer doing this kind of skill. Who is doing it? And then you create the need from just the fact that you make it better known. And for the moment, it's too early. Yes, Paul.
No. Chris was ahead of me.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I haven't seen.
Chris, did you want to say something first?
You're muted, Chris. You're muted.
Sorry, I was just going to suggest have a look at my website. It's called quantumedge.org. And the reason I recommend it is that I just changed it. I just redid it. So it's as recent an example of offering language for the introduction of value based in the Aikido principles and practices. So you'll notice, I think, that Aikido is not mentioned on the homepage, but it's mentioned on all of the other pages, or most of them. So the way I'm positioning this work now is around intuitive leadership, that there is really no way for leaders to handle the complexity and acceleration of change that we're facing from the old mind, as Einstein would say. So I'm essentially making the bid for intuitive awareness, Aikido as a way, amongst others, to access intuitive awareness such that leaders can function intuitively on both culture and strategy, as well as tactical action. And this is getting traction. So you'll also see in there, everything is backed up by these little stories that I talked about, that I used to start it when I would do a one-page story, problem, solution, result, parable, and hand it to people to correct and guide me on whether they thought it was interesting and who I should talk to. So the examples of those stories are inside the site. But I think more importantly is the positioning of the site based on what I'm seeing right now in my clients.
Thank you, Chris. And this conversation is bringing us right to the question of why are we here? Having an association that you can be a member of gives you an opportunity to identify yourself with this profession. It's like being a member of the bar or being a member of the American Medical Association or having a medical license. Right. So by being a member of an association, you get that support amongst other people who are so identified, but you also get an opportunity to say to people who don't know about the association that there's a club and you're a member of it, and it's a profession, and it's a new profession, but you're not alone. So professional identity is what we're talking about, and we've been talking about it as in terms of skills and qualifications and confidence. But I want to suggest that you can have professional identity just by having a membership in a professional association. And that's what Applied Aikido Association is.
Yes, Jack.
Paul, did you have some comments you wanted to make?
It was only just to reinforce what Chris had said, really, which was about what I learned in my consulting career was and I work for IBM, so we could talk technical turkey left, right, and center and confuse clients quite easily,
right?
Especially with 10 IBMers in the room, which was our usual way of selling to clients. What I know is story matter. I would say meet them where they are and tell them stories. And what everyone has said, and then everything else can sit behind it that says, here's the process, here's our pretty slideware that's been, done to death. It's 100 pages long and it explains everything in as much detail as you could possibly want because we're consultants and that's how we express our value. But tell them stories, to be human. The most human story. So I led a school. So in the UK, we have a thing called free schools. And free schools, basically, the law allows you to set up a school outside the traditional framework. It must teach English and mathematics and one other subject. But then it can teach whatever it wants. So we took a group of kids who had emotional, behavioral, social difficulties. They'd been given a tough start in life. The school was for them. And we went to the Department of Education, the UK government, and they sat there and they said, how are you going to measure progress? And we're like, progress is them getting out of bed and making it through the school door. That's progress. So we told the story of a young man that had been in a youth leadership program at the age of 15. He'd done truancy, drugs, bullying, you name it, vandalism. He'd done it. He got a record. We put him into this program. 2 years later, he led the England under-17s rugby international team at Twickenham as the captain of the team. I said, how do you measure that progress? How do you measure courage? How do you measure that finding that better self, which is in all people? So and they were like, oh well, they backed right off. They closed right down because they were saying, oh well, it's Ofsted that need us to tell it, which is the standards agency here. Ofsted, we need to convince them that we're doing the right thing, and if we give you 125 grand to start the core school, you're not gonna. It's like, well, that's what we're gonna do. Give us the money. So stories. So I really like that, Chris. I like your website too. It's fabulous.
So let me piggyback on that because I think Andrew can relate to it. I'm in education, and I think I agree with Chris, and that's what I like about this group. We come at it from our life space and our life frame. And my life frame is, I'm not an introvert. I'm an extrovert, and I've gotten in trouble being extroverting in a meeting and raising my hand and being out of the box because you got to have that tipping point or that people that are willing to hear, But that's why you heard in my story that I found people that I thought I heard them saying we heard the same value, but they had a missing practice piece, the do, the somatic. And that's what I see as a tremendous with, Eastern spiritual practices. And there's even There's even stuff like this in looking back into the Stoics and all, philosophically. You know, the Greeks had it, but the major thing throughout Western civilization has been the head stuff, right? And you could talk a good game, like the sophist, right? That's what Plato was upset about. Those politicians, you know? So, but anyway, I like what you're saying, and maybe Andrew can relate to it. I was a counselor, psychologist, and I practiced this, and kids would go home and say, Mr. Richard really helped me. And then parents would say, what were you doing? And I see that as the one-to-one dynamic. But when the door opens, how do you then go into the system? And that's why I try to align with a curriculum, because you're asked to do that. Or like you said, Paul, this school has certain forms. And then when you use the language, you bring in your life experience and all. And I found it really interesting. And I'll tell you a couple quick things that I learned. And that's what I like about this group. The first time my friend, who's passed on, but he, you know, lived in Japan, he was very fluent in this, had a very deep understanding. And we go in with our suits on at an education conference. And you know that, Andrew, you get about 1 hour for a workshop. Or maybe if you're a super speaker, they'll give you 3 hours that you have to fill it up, just like a teacher in school. 1 hour to talk and use your PowerPoint, or 3 hours. What am I going to do for 3 hours with people, you know? So you get 1 hour. And we used to show a little video clip of Saltomi, our teacher, doing Rundori. And everybody go, what's that? And you'd spend 49 minutes talking about it. And then after, he was processing and saying, you know, if we just start dancing, you could do a hell of a lot of dancing in an hour. And that's when our 1 hour package that we got moved to, we do a 2-minute demonstration and we open it up very processed. What did you see? And people started to name the stuff that we wanted to teach them, you know? So you take the frame, and like you're doing, Outward Bound does that. You know, you give a challenge and then the dialogue continues and you go deeper and lead that as a teacher. So that's what I found, that's where I brought the Aikido in. Like Paul, Don Levine did. He put Aikido in his sociology class every other week to introduce people. So you bring whatever works for you and you introduce that. And that's what I find talking to these gentlemen. And as we all talk, if I'm a consultant and I'm going to see a person one-to-one, you know, some of that works. If I'm going in and somebody expects me to bring a proposal and a curriculum, I introduce it that way. And that's what I've learned from this group, how to get the language right and clarify it and get the stories right. So it depends on the frame you're working with, you know.
A lot of you have talked about this work as embodied work, as modeling, as somatics. In this world of, well, as you can see, we are now online, and that seems to become the norm. Do you think it can work in the online world? Can we actually present this stuff online? You know, what do you think? I mean, Jerry was about to say that he was planning something, you know, that he could deliver online. Yeah, what do you think, guys?
Well, we're all challenged by the online question, and I found myself in the design of an online leadership development course that is in the works, recommending that we ask each of the participants to bring a partner into the room with them at some point during the online seminars, so that you could actually create the feedback loop. Because without it, yeah, you can teach presence, center ground, flow, you bet. But without the feedback, it's pretty hard to teach harmony. And especially hard to give them the direct experience of access to intuition when the shit's hitting the fan, which for me is in all of these leadership development seminars that I've done over the years, we've used, say, the morning of one day to teach center and harmony, to teach presence and harmony through lots of our exercises, both partner and non-partner. but the way we really investigated the intuitive response is to do slow motion randori with at least 6 players. 5, 4, you can do it with 4 or 5. The ability to move in relationship to a complex set of forces is what inculcates the power of center and ground and harmony, because they discover when they play with those principles in that situation, they find power and less effort. So I'm really challenged online to move beyond the individual, and though I think you can do some partner stuff if they agree to it, you're left with a real challenge when it comes to what I call the real simulation and application of this work in the game. So if I can set up a randori of 4 attackers, then I have the person describe them as their situation. So, all right, well, that lady's my wife, and this person over here is my boss, and this is the person that gives me a hard time on the team. And so you should push and pull on me, and I want you to just ignore me. And so they start to act it out, and we do psychodrama with Aikido, and they discover deep presence and deep relational resonance as a way to resolve those different forces in their domain.
Yeah, I want to encourage.
I don't know how to do that online yet.
Yeah, I want to encourage. I mean, both you guys, Paul and Andrew, in teaching and consulting, you've got your environment. You know, bring your Aikido into that environment. I wouldn't recommend trying to start an applied Aikido thing online. It's just, I mean, you might be able to complement something that you do in either of those venues with an online experience. But the real risk of trying to do something in the online world is that you ignore what you have. It's way more accessible and more material.
Jerry, let me share one other quick example that's the deepest example I have these days of where this work really makes a difference. I'm doing 3-day retreats with individual leaders. And this is face-to-face. We rent them a house here on the island, and we teach them Zazen for deep presence, and then teach them graduated, more and more intense Aikido, including the sword, by the end of the 3 days. So they're immersed in an inquiry, a somatic inquiry, into the relationship between these principles enacted, embodied, and the situation that they're challenged by, their leadership situation, their family situation. Very deep, very profound in its effect, a lot of fun. And in that sense, if you want to get in this work, start one-to-one with folks that want to play with you, and it'll grow. If you don't have a forum, start one-to-one. If you have a forum, hell, circle them up and dive in.
Nice. I want to say that this organization, again, where's my finger? There it is. And if you all look, Youth and Peace in Action, you get on their website, YPA, and you can connect back to the sponsoring agency. What I'm following along is how they are blending Outward Bound online, right? Because you're not out in the woods and all. And, you can teach conceptual things. But I'm very intrigued with how these people, here they are, have had to do it online, because they've had to do it the last couple of years, and they've been done it with high school kids in schools, in structure. And one of the things that I'm intrigued with that comes, I think, out of their model, seems to me to be cutting edge, is in between the didactic stuff that now they've got it on a phone that kids can read and learn, if you're highly motivated. That's the issue. but they do what they call challenge days, you know, or challenge periods. And again, it reminded me this one workshop I did, which used Aikido principles. When I did it, I used regular kids' games. So if you ever do the human knot, are you familiar with the human knot, Paul and Andrew and all? Yeah, I mean, that's a great game about conflict and leadership and all. And most people that I've seen, you know, in educational settings, preschool, they do it to keep kids busy. I did it to get, and people want to play. I like what Chris says, so they jump into it. But the processing is where you bring the language and all. And I've done it with adults, and I've done it with adults and kids together, you know? So that's what I'm looking at. How would you do that online? And we've talked about this a lot, and I like what Chris said. If you have a friend, I've had some kids, when this COVID started, I kept a virtual dojo, and some families had more than one person, right? But they would come and we'd just do a weapons kata. So the kata, they kept them connected, and it was something they could focus on. But it is a challenge, as, you know, between now and next week, you know, do this cutting kata, right? So that's a challenge, and they commit to it. And then when they come back, you can process it. But this platform is, I mean, this venue is really hard. And it's certainly challenging Aikido schools. You know, how do you get people together to do the somatic piece? So I think we're going to be challenged going forward. But again, what I've contributed, there's a lot of people that don't even know this language or these principles. So you can still fit it in some way, and using this venue, you know, to start introducing people to it. But that's the challenge, I think. Yeah, Chris, Paul.
I wanted to come back to a point Christian was making about codifying all this, because one of the lessons I learned from NLP when I got into it, I went up and certified as a trainer, thought it was fantastic, wanted to set up my business to teach people NLP, because I thought, oh, here's the thing that helps people get over, connect, as we've said here, connect to themselves. And one of the difficulties is it lacked a body of research. It lacked a body of grounded, to use that word, case studies that talked about the mechanics of what was going on, did it in an academic style, whereas other forms like CBT and psychodynamic, you know, lots of studies done, lots of research, even emotional intelligence. But if you dip into that hard enough, you know, emotional intelligence will conclude that there's not enough studies, there's problems with the studies. You know, emotional intelligence, does it really exist in the way that it's described? But it has that body of research that makes it, that gives it that groundedness to say, actually, this is a serious thing. So I just want to return to that again, because I don't want us to lose that and fall into the trap that NLP fell into, which it broadly fell into disrepute in certain sectors, certainly within the business community, because people used it. People were like, oh, great, I can use it for sales and I can manipulate people using language patterns and things like that. And you can do that if you want, but it wasn't where a lot of people were coming from. So I just wonder, I just wanted to flag that as not to lose that, because we can do lots of different practices, and so that was the first thing. The second thing was my dojo did online stuff. They did a phenomenal job, but one of the clever things they did was they did social distance training using sticks. So they had sticks that were painted red on one end and yellow on the other, and they had a pair of sticks. And you can do most techniques. I would say you could do 70% of techniques still with sticks socially distanced. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they would also do we do a little bit of striking as well, because we want to make it more practical. But because you were wearing pads and gloves, then, you know, that meant that was not an issue. So I just wanted to flag a couple of those things up.
Paul, when you talked about the retreat in Scotland, I immediately imagined you buying Joes for every one of these folks and going for a walk with the Joes, and then being able to play out there with the Joes.
Exactly. Just real simple Joe work. Now, again, we do Yoshinkan. So in terms of yeah, there you go. So Joe work is a bit of a challenge because we're all precise and we've got to be online, and the problem
Right.
with Joe is it takes you
You
offline.
can drop all that shit and just play with people and they'll get it.
I'm with you. We did Joe Giawaza in today's training class, so it can be done. So that's fine.
No,
I
I
need someone
want
to teach me the kata though.
I want to respond to Paul. I think you're right. I found you're right. It's the classic problem between psychotherapists that are all very qualitative and case study based, very individualized, and the academic community that says it's got to be quantified, and there's always this struggle. This particular venture has a lot of case studies of the kids doing the application of their project in a community. So I think as we go forward, we have some case studies, we have some recordings, and that was what we've talked about, of people applying this like we started out with our stories. And it's very interesting because I think we need to amass that as a field of knowledge versus, just start a Aikido dojo.
To Christian's point.
Yeah. So that's one of the things going forward. You got to have people that have taken it off the mat and have done more than, Ikkyo, Nikkyo, Sankyo, so that's part of building this field. But I agree with you. And I think the language, how you present it, and being aware of, the people that come from a qualitative process-based, what do they expect in terms of reliability and validity? And people in structures that want a proposal and some type of research, but you can still appeal to them. And I think that's one of the challenges.
Yeah. George Box says all models are flawed, but some are useful.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And what is it? I always like Kurt Lewin's thing. The best thing is a good theory, right?
Yeah,
but a theory is only a meta model, right? Of way of looking at the world, but it guides your movement. And most places they'll take that, and say, okay, well, I saw your theory, So you got to confront both of those,
Jerry, have you got a didgeridoo in hand?
No, it's a Joe. And I like the Joe talk because since dojos have been closed, I didn't really pay much attention to weapons work when I was training. I like to be grabbed and I like to grab, but a Joe and a Boken is a wonderful thing to line up to. It's a partner that doesn't talk back. And it's a great practice, even without having kata. It's not difficult to keep it in front of you and find your center. So it's a great practice to just change harmony with, holding onto a Joe, as is frankly a door frame. You can learn from a stick a lot of applied Aikido.
So I have an example of sitting with a circle of leaders. Each of them has a boken in front of them. I asked them to pick up the boken, drop in, listen in, and then speak what they're hearing from the sword about the essence of leadership. Profound, just incredible stuff. The metaphor is so old. Anyway, very profound.
Mm.
Is that one boken each?
Pardon me?
Is that one sword each?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I, that was an experiment. The truth is that Joe is better because they can take it home and walk around with it, and not be bothered. Whereas if somebody's walking down the street with a boken,
yeah, we saw The Last Samurai.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you put a little rubber foot on a Joe, it's a nice walking stick.
That's right. So let's hear some more from Paul and Andrew about what else we might address. We don't have a lot of time left, but there's, what are your critical questions right now?
I'm doing a lot of talking, Andrew. Don't let me take your airtime, please.
Oh, you carry on.
So I was told by one of my mentors, ask for what you want when you meet in groups like this. So what I want is a curriculum that would get me started on how to run a workshop. An example that would say, if I'm doing a 2-hour thing, this is what it looks like. Or if I'm doing a half-day thing, this is what it looks like. And then that would give me a way into it that kind of goes, all right, I get it. I can see that now. Whereas I know the sorts of things I would teach. I'm thinking, yeah, I take some bokken and we'd stand, or I take some shinai and we'd show them the immediacy of the difference between the two, that kind of thing. But I'm sure it's simpler than that, and that's what I'm grasping for right now. So I'll ask for that.
So I'd be glad to have a conversation with you down the line and share with you how I've approached that in different ways. But I don't think we should try to get into that in the few minutes we have left.
Okay.
But I'd be glad to share at least an example of that.
Thank you.
I think though, yes.
Yeah, that's it.
You'll need to generate your own, obviously.
Yeah, it is a challenging question because we all come from different schools, different sources, and so our content is different. So we haven't really got round, as a practice or learning or teaching progresses, some kind of framework forms around it and crystallizes. I think we're in the stage where, from what we've heard, everyone starts by sharing their insight and sharing with friends and sharing with mates and colleagues and whatever. So we haven't really come to that formalized curriculum, and I don't know whether we really want it, because then once you formalize it and crystallize it, then it becomes something that everyone kind of hangs on to, right? And then it becomes applied Aikido is this. You go to a class and you expect to do this, that, the other.
I support what you're saying. I think we'll leave it open. But we have articulated in our mission a set of principles that are cardinal regardless. And in a sense, each of us is somaticizing those principles in our own way.
So on that note, I'd like to suggest that, without getting too complicated, that the somatic elements can be separated from Aikido. When you think about what are the elements that we learn from Aikido that have to do with what's going on inside my skin. All right, it's not about using weapons. It's not about being attacked. It's not about strategies. It's just simply about, can I separate what's in my head from my heart and my hara? Those are the elements. Those are the 3 shapes that are in Aikido. And I think, I've probably had more experience with learning to give language to that awareness, because although it's pretty popular these days for people to learn to speak from their heart as opposed to their head, the huge value from Aikido is, can you speak from your hara? Can you imagine in your still point the wisdom of silence, of not knowing, right? That's a tremendous sense of somatic embodiment that is, in some ways, for me it came from Aikido, but it can be separated from Aikido. Just to
be not bound by it.
Yeah, it's not, and for people to get into their bodies before they think about picking up a bokken or a jo or being grabbed has value in itself.
Sure.
So what I was hearing when Paul made that comment, and we've talked about this before, not as Chris said, we've got some cardinal principles that came out of our discussions. And I'll use the word meta principles, I guess, like I said, essentials, if you want to call it. I think we've talked about not saying, well, since Christian started this, we're going to push Aikicom. You know, it's more like what you're saying. I teach sociology, and I look at all different kinds of syllabi, and then I say, oh, there's some common elements here. And for me, at this present time, I'm looking for syllabi of people I've located who include some experiential pieces, right? And that's what I've tried to do. So maybe, as Paul was saying, maybe we could share with him, Chris mentioned, things that we have put in that curricular format, and then you look at it, you know, and it triggers ideas. And we've talked about that. Going forward, that's what I thought I was hearing in this organization, not that now you got to be stamped as applied Aikido, but we're providing a platform and a place for people to say, let's put this out to your peers and to other people that are saying, you know, hey, I'm just getting started. What's that look like in a curriculum? Because I've got a schoolmaster calling me, right? To help you get started with your own language and your own stories. And that's what I was kind of hearing too. And we're in the process of doing that and sharing that amongst each other.
And perhaps, Paul, you know, you could be part of that process of formulating, you know, a kind of structure to help other people onboard other people into the applied Aikido practice, because you obviously have a lot of experience in structuring things. What do you think? Yes. Christian, how do you go into one of your sessions or one of your courses? Do you have a particular curriculum or you know, set piece?
No, it's not with a standard solution. It's just coming. Many times I enter by surprise, I would say. It's just like a physical practice or stress, working on stress, or warm-up exercise in the morning and this kind of thing. And or it was just in what has been called smart fun activities. So just you enter and say, okay, we will have some fun with some kind of practice. So the people are just interested by, okay, it will be nice, we'll have fun, and then when they see the bokken in the corner of the room, they say, oh, wow, yeah. We'll have a fight, and you don't have to explain anything else. And then you put the sword in their hands, and then you can leave the room. They are already transformed, so you don't have anything to do. And I remember I had the first time I had 80 people initiation to my Aikicom, and then I put a sword 1 for 2, and then I saw the impact of just seeing the big boss of the company working with the young man at the entry of the building. So probably they never talk together, and just holding the sword facing each other. And I saw 70 others stopping to work and look at what's happening. It's just this kind of surprise of, it's kind of, yes, most of the time. And then, of course, there's the classical conflict management, smooth communication. Is there a place for vulnerability in companies? All this kind of big theme. And you say, okay, martial arts are a royal entry for those domains. And so inevitably they are interested. But it's more by answering their problems, what they are requesting. And I say, okay, I feel good. For example, I had somebody ask me, okay, the global theme of the day was how to make a group of person a team, for example. Just this question. And then it's okay. And it is a feeling. It's really, and many times the times where it worked better was when I was kind of unbalanced. My program could not fit in the questioning. My program could not fit in the way they were asking questions. My program was not fitting with it. So it's okay. No, I have to find. No, I'm facing my boundary, and so I have to find something. and say, okay, let's take a weapon, or just let's stand in a circle, or close your eyes and just move in the room, or whatever, this kind of exercise. And then it is just, I think it's totally aiki, just starting from the event, what's happening, and then asking them the question. So most of the time, I enter the training by just explaining, this is the practice I'm doing. This is the qualities you can get from this, if you are interested. So I try to speak kind of hypnotic language, maybe in vague terms, and I'm watching where they just trigger something as triggers in their unconscious or conscious mind. And when I feel, okay, this seems to be interesting for the subject they want to handle for the moment, and so say, no, about this subject, what I can propose you is this. So I just try to trigger the interest, and then from there, I'm entering in a proposal of a practice.
So I have a question for Paul and Andrew. Would it make a difference to you to see yourself as a somatic consultant or teacher? And what does that feel like? Is that close to what you're looking for?
It's not about having another label. I've got about 20 different certifications for in going through the journey of trying to find this answer, which God is great. Bless. Which is awesome. You know, I've learned so much, but I promise you, I've learned more in the 4 years I've spent on the mat than I've been anywhere else.
There you go.
So I don't need to have the label, though. If that helps, I'm happy to wear it. What I'm interested in is the dough. So I am guilty of teaching emotional intelligence in IBM as a 2x2 matrix on a flip chart, with a class of consultants, saying to them, "This is what emotional intelligence is. Do you understand that?" "Yes, we understand that." "Right, off you go.
Moving right along.
Go and do some role plays. Come back. Tell us what happened in the role plays. What worked? What didn't work? What questions have you got? Right. Any other questions? Do you now understand emotional intelligence?" "Yes, we understand emotional intelligence." "Good. Are you ready for lunch?" "Yes, we're hungry." "Good. Let's go." And then we go. And then we come back. And that's got absolutely nothing. And that bothers me, because as I now look at this gap between the amount we spend on leadership development, the problems we have, then I know in my heart of hearts that the dough is the connection. And therefore I don't need to wear a label to do that. What I need is a group of people to help me challenge my ideas, to continually make what I bring to the table better, and to think about ways to do that. My ultimate aim is to build a business that gives me enough profit and time to go, right, I'm going to take 2 months off, and I'm going to take a group of kids to the wilds of Scotland with Joes and Bokken, and we're going to sort some stuff out. We're going to connect you to who you really are, and you're going to be the jewel that I see already. And the reason I do that is because I went through the same journey, and I know what it's like to feel shit, and I know what it's like to come through that journey, and I know what it's like to be on the other side of it, and it's wonderful. So I want to give that experience to other people. That's kind of why I'm here. That's kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's my why.
One of the things that I found very impactful for me was actually to watch Jerry do a very simple process with someone who had a problem with their employer or whatever on YouTube. Maybe Jerry, you'd like to share that with Paul when you can, but it was a simple process where this person went through this somatic little exercise, and then after the exercise they were asked to respond to the challenge, and they responded spontaneously in a completely different and resourceful way, and that was the magic of just that little exercise. So if you want to share that sometime, Jerry.
Yeah, thank you. I will. I mean, I put my email in the chat, but I want to say to Paul that if you're teaching emotional intelligence, what you've got on the board and what wanting to learn from you is defined. And if what you're putting out as a topic is presence, is something embodied, is a somatic sense, somatic attunement is what I would call it, that's a different topic.
Mm.
That's closer to what you are saying you want to do with these kids than emotional intelligence. Although emotional,
Yeah, no, I was giving the emotional intelligence as an example of what I used to do.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm
well,
not
you're
really-
moving toward being a somatic practitioner, whether you call yourself that or not.
Yeah.
And I do think that teaching and practicing applied Aikido is a somatic practice. It's not it's not a conceptual thing. It's not something you learn by reading a book.
I agree with you.
Mm.
And then how do you take things like stuff that you do in the mankind and bring Aikido practice into that through some of that stuff? So, you know, a classic question there in the warrior training is, who do you serve? And the most important question in coaching is, who are you? So, you know, molding a process
Yes.
in a number of different ways around that to give people, and I love the idea of the individual retreats. I think that's incredibly powerful, Chris.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going down that rabbit hole.
My apologies. I have to leave on the hour.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Gerald, Jack,
Thank you, Chris.
Jerry, Andrew, and Paul. I look forward to back in your play.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Chris. We'll probably wrap up in 5 minutes or so. But and that kind of I was just about to say that it sounds like, Paul, you've actually looked at different processes, and you know, like ULab and Theory U and Heart Math and all those, and identified Aikido within them. So you've got that ability to I think you've connected somehow with the essence of Aikido, in that you can see the essence of Aikido expressing in different ways. So perhaps you could have a look at what one of those approaches, whether it's Otto Scharmer's or Heart Math, you know, the way they teach their process, and take that on board and use that as a framework, you know, to get started. Yeah, and definitely, I think that what you've brought up is a really interesting question, and I think it's a really important question for us as to how do we go forward, creating some kind of framework that people can use to launch their applied Aikido practice, you know, out in the world.
So, Paul, I just wanted to respond to a couple of things. What came to my mind as you were describing, I call them dog and pony shows, you know. Go in and do your thing. And if somebody's paying for it and you're sincere, you're just saying, I'm sharing, you know, what maybe the Western or the language is. And now I get the time off to go for 2 weeks and help these kids. And so what's come to me through Aikido is, which we're leaving out in these experiences, the dog and pony shows, is the notion of staying together in relationship and what emerges and how that transforms you. And that's the dough, like you were saying. Yeah. I like to play with words. A lot of times when I write up on the board, I teach psychology. When I write developmental, I write develop-mental, right? Mm-hmm. And I've been playing with this, and we have been saying applied Aikido, which to me, I play with those words to try to say, what am I trying to tell people? And Aiki are a set of principles, back to what I showed you, but the do is the form. And it's a different form than most of us have been exposed to. And you hear Christian and you hear Chris. I see Chris being a real process person. I'm sure Andrew sitting there coming out of education. We had to write curriculum. We had to write a lesson plan every day, right, Andrew?
Learning outcomes.
I never did the lesson plan, but the system. I had about 50 of them in my drawer. So when my headmaster came in, I could give it to him. He would leave, and I would do the dough. But that's a reality. And we talk about this a lot. Are we honest? I hear you with yourself, that when you're doing this in a group, whether it's 1 hour, like my friend did, we started to learn how to dance more in 1 hour than to lecture in 1 hour, you know?
Yeah.
And I do that in my sociology class. So I think that's part of our journeys. And like I said, I find every time I come here, we have our challenges and differences, and we each have our egos. We come from our view of the world, but in our conversations, and as Chris said, our dialogues, it seems at the end, which I like about this experience, is we're getting to those essentials. So I was in a workshop the other day, and I find myself in my language saying, East and West, East and West. And I come from Aikido, and this woman from Denmark was saying, you know, I come through an aesthetic dance practice, and my teacher began to use the language of Euro, what she said, Eurasian, which really focused us on essentials. And I said, geez, I never realized when I just said the dualistic part of East and West, that's how I thought of it. It was, you know, being a barrier to people. So that, you know, as you get into the mess of the weeds, right, and you get into doing these things, you'll, like you've heard people, you'll hear people that'll pop up and say things, and that will then evolve and emerge what you want to do as a person. That's what I have found with myself. But it might start with a curriculum that the headmaster wants. And then he calls me next month and says, what do you mean by that somatic thing? You're doing that on Thursday. Can I come to your class? Oh, sure. Come on in, you know, but it's an emerging kind of thing. And that's what I like about this group. We all bring that, what we're seeing right now, but underneath it, there seems to be these essential things we're all grappling for, you know?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think we probably need to wrap up, but yeah. And
I'd like to hear from Andrew.
Yeah, yeah. Any last words?
No, that's been quite helpful. You give me a lot to think about. I've taught Aikido for many, many years, and even in that context, I'm always trying to put a different spin on things and move away from just teaching formalized Aikido.
Yeah.
So what are you taking away from this, Andrew? What are you taking? What's your takeaway?
Well, it actually reinforces my beliefs. And I mean, my son was in the army for about 10 years. He joined up as a 17-year-old on the promise that join the army and see the world. And in fact, he went from one war zone to another. He went from Ireland to Iraq to Afghanistan, and he never actually saw anything in the army apart from conflict. And he came out of the army in quite a bad state. So I've been working for a number of years with him, and now, thankfully, we got him sorted out. So Aikido actually puts all that sort of thing in context.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Okay. Paul, last word.
Takeaway?
One word: excited.
Great. Well, really look forward to having you on board and having more discussions like this. Would you be open to more discussions like this, and where we can sort of grapple with, you know, more of that, this kind of stuff?
If you'll have me, yes.
Oh, definitely. Okay. Well, thanks very much, guys, and have a great weekend. Christian, last word from the seed man.
Just to say that I already almost agreed with Paul to prepare a presentation of the model he explained me, if he still agreed to do it. So that it's a better way to have a more clear illustration, the way you see the things. And I think it would be interesting for everybody.
Definitely. Definitely. Jack? Last word. Thank you. Yeah.
Look at.
Your beard has grown by at least 2 millimeters. Yeah. Jerry, last word.
Appreciating all you guys. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks very much, guys, and we'll see you next time. We hope to have this more often and in the future, near future. Okay.